My name is Stacy, and I handle adult education here at the North Carolina Museum of History. And we're so glad that you're joining us for today's History at High Noon program, Dr. Milton Quigless, A Life and Legacy. A few quick housekeeping items. We ask that you please type any questions that you have for our guest speaker into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. At the lecture, our adult programs intern Allie will ask our speaker as many of your questions as time allows. So it's my honor to introduce and welcome back, Carol Quigless. Carol M. Quigless was born in the rural town of Tarboro. As an adult, she lived in New York City and Los Angeles before settling in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Charlottesville,
Mhm.
Virginia. She is a board-certified massage therapist, certified clinical aromatherapist, and Reiki master teacher. Quigless has a private practice in Charlottesville and presents workshops for both the public and body workers. She also teaches all levels of Reiki. Quigless is dedicated to educating people about natural health modalities to assist them in developing healthy lifestyles. So welcome, Carol. Thanks so much for being with us today.
I'm really happy to be here. You know, your museum is one of my favorite places,
Thank you. We're always so
truly.
happy that you choose to spend time with us and share your talents with us.
Mhm.
So we're going to do a little bit of a different program today, you guys. We're going to have more of like a interview conversation style, where Carol can share some of her incredible father's legacy with us today. So let's get started. For folks who are joining us and maybe don't know about your dad, can you tell us who Dr. Milton Quigless Sr. was?
Sure. He was born in rural Mississippi, Port Gibson, Mississippi, 1906. I believe it was either 1902 or 1906. I get the dates mixed up. And he had four brothers and sisters, and so it's five children altogether. His mom was a housewife, but then was very ingenious in trying to bring money into the family. So they had a boarding house. His dad had worked in a factory until he injured his hand, and then started hauling freight from the Mississippi around Port Gibson to where the freight needed to be. Um, and so it was a very rural life. It was a poor life, but they never thought of themselves as poor because they always had dinner on the table, always had food. Um, and I'm just looking at these pictures. It's really fun to see the pictures of them. That's my mom and dad on wedding day. Um, and he was decidedly the puny one, the run of the family. And so they told him that he didn't have to go to school if he didn't want to. So he dropped out of school in fifth grade. Problem was he also wanted to be a doctor. He saw he he sort of bumped into a room where a baby was being delivered, and he was very curious about that, and he developed this passion for wanting to be a doctor and helping people and helping animals too. Uh, So after a while, he realized his mistake and he had to double up on studying. Back then, there wasn't a regular high school. There was, just segregation everywhere. But he did manage to get it together and went to live with his brother out in Chicago and went to Crane Junior College and aced the boards to get into med school. Um, he went to Meharry. He worked his way through Meharry, which is, you can't do that now. There's just impossible to work your way through a tuition. But he worked his way through uh, Meharry, uh, working on the railroad as a Pullman porter on weekends and holidays and on during the summer. Um, he had tried to tried his hand at a little bootleg, and that turned into a disaster. Um, and he also tried playing trombone in a minstrel show, and that didn't turn out too well. So his best gig was being a Pullman porter on the railroads, and it afforded him seeing different cultures, different parts of the country, the Pacific Northwest. So for a little guy from Port Gibson, he saw a lot very early on. And in fact, I think everybody should, learn about firsthand about different parts of the country and third world countries and Europe and everywhere as much as they can. It's it's just such an amazing education. So he did settle down. He was looking for a place to settle down, and one thing was that when he was part of the minstrel show, they came to Greensboro, North Carolina, him and trombone, and he thought North Carolina was beautiful. He thought, well, I want to come back here, and this is where I want to have my practice. So he asked around, and back then, to me, it seems to me that there was something of a brotherhood among the black doctors, like they were willing to help each other out. There was a Dr. Avon in Rocky Mount, and my dad was talking to him apparently about where to move in North Carolina. He said, well, you can't move to Rocky Mount because I'm here, but Tarboro needs a doctor. So he came to Tarboro in 1936. Tarboro had two black doctors previous to my dad arriving, but they were no longer there. So he opened up his practice, which was sort of like a strange affair because there was no place to really have a practice. So he treated people in their homes, um, and that's really a rough situation when you think about it. He there's the clinic, um, and he managed to do it somehow. He arrived in Tarboro with no money, and people were the black community was very kind to him, really helped him out. And in 1948, he was able to build that clinic right there with funding from uh, not not the banks in Tarboro, but the banks in Rocky Mount. Um, all of this is chronicled in his autobiography. There's an old edition of it, and it's just now, I've had it re-edited so it's more readable, but you can find all this history in greater detail in the book, which will be soon published, I think by the end of February. But he opened up the clinic. That's the inside. That's the women's ward. Um, and he got some of the clients, some of the patients sewed the gowns for the patients and also for the surgical masks. And he got the operating lights and things for the operating room from a decommissioned ship, Army ship, Navy ship. So he had to piece it together, and he did it, which is quite amazing. And my mom helped him tremendously too. It was a project of theirs, and the clinic opened in December, and she helped with all the business end of it, and he did the medical end of it. So, to give you a background, it was segregated United States. There is no place for African Americans to get decent, good health care. The county hospital refused surgical privileges because of segregation. Um, if you were hospitalized, you got the torn sheets, the rusty equipment. It was just not up to par. So that was the inspiration of my dad having his own um, facilities. So he had outpatient, he had 25 beds for inpatient, and it was um, it was busy. It was very busy. He trained staff. Um, my mom helped with that, trying to help the nurses study to get their RN, registered nurse licenses. He trained Miss Ida Beeman to take care of the pharmacy. It was an in-house pharmacy because um, the patients could afford the drugs that they needed rather than going outside the pharmacy. So it decreased the price of the drugs that they needed. So he had to do some of everything from surgeries to take care of your flu to deliver babies, and anything he couldn't handle, he sent you to Duke or UNC. I mean, he knew when he was beat. So, uh, but he was very, very busy. So it was a real milestone for people all over that area, for the African Americans all over the area, huge part of the state uh, to come to him because they knew they would receive quality care. My dad was brilliant, and he never stopped studying. I remember that he did surgeries on Wednesdays, I think it was, and Tuesday night you find him in his armchair reading about the particular surgery he was going to do the next day. And he went to the NMA medical conventions. That was the National Medical Association. That was a segregated medical association. African Americans weren't allowed to get into the AMA. So, as industrious as Black people are, they formed their own medical society, and he would always go to those and get caught up on anything new that he needed to know about. He was busy. He had a family. He had me, my brother, and my sister. He made time to enjoy life. Uh, one of the things he really enjoyed was over time, somehow he managed to acquire a farm. He didn't farm it himself, but he loved having that farm and having people work it. Um, and he was a country boy at heart. You know, he came from Port Gibson, small town. So he really loved that farm and he loved his practice. And there have been maybe a couple of other hospitals, African American hospitals in the area, but they failed. But my dad's did not fail. And I think it's because he connected with people um, and he found a way to circumvent um, harsh realities of the racism that was around him. The fact that he had a farm, he could supply chicken and beef and pork, um, for the clients, for the patients. So that's a little bit about him. I think I started to ramble, so better lead me back in, Stacy.
No, that was wonderful. So kind of a follow-up question to that. You were talking about the many challenges that he faced. What do you feel like was the greatest challenge that he faced in not only serving the community, but also just the greatest challenge facing African American doctors during that time?
Well, number one is going to be the racism. As I said, he was denied surgical privileges at the county hospital. I mean, where any other doctor graduating from any other white doctor graduating from med school would have a place to go to do the surgery. It would be at the hospital, at the county hospitals that had a surgical suite already, there. Would have medical offices that there would be a support system already there. So because of the racism, he didn't have that. So the Black doctors had to um, work together in trying to support each other to survive and to give the African American community the health care that they really needed. I mean, really needed. There's a it, the, there's a photograph of my dad leaning over. I think it's in this batch. He's leaning over a tumor that he removed from a lady, and everybody thinks that he's lean. The tumor is so big, everyone thinks that it's a baby, and it's not. It's a tumor, and it would be rare for you to see someone come in with something, a tumor that large in this day and age. It never would have gotten that far. But that's the kind of health care, that's the kind of, um, uh, that's how bad things could get in terms of health care. There is the story I like to tell about how when I worked down at the clinic, um, well, I'll tell that story later. I'll just try to keep on track here. But racism was by far the most difficult obstacle. It was the number one obstacle to his career and to health care um, of African Americans in the whole area. It's just amazing.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Can you tell us? I'm sure you have many, many wonderful memories of your family, but can you tell us about one or two in particular that stand out that have really stuck with you about your family or your dad growing up in that environment?
Sure. You have to realize that the clinic was central to all our lives. But the story I was going to tell that impacted me, I never forgot, was that um, when I was working down there, we all worked there. My brother worked down there. I worked down there. My sister worked down there. At some point in our lives, we worked down at that clinic. But me being the youngest, that's where I hung out. Forget the babysitters, and I would, be hanging out down at the clinic. But this man came in, and he had a huge sore on his leg, huge, and he had ridden his bicycle 13 miles to get to my dad, and my dad admitted him to the hospital for 2 weeks, and my dad said he didn't need to be in the hospital, but he needed good nutrition and he needed rest. So he just let him stay there for 2 weeks to get himself together. That always stuck in my mind. The other thing is at the dinner table, everybody sat down. It's different these days, I know, but everybody sat down at the dinner table at the same time. And what was talked about what happened at the clinic, what happened at the house, how was my mom's day? It was like that. And then also, rehashing of his life, various stories of his life and my mother's life, getting there. There's that family cohesiveness. It wasn't always harmonious, but it was there. Um, another thing that I remember a lot about my dad was walking in the country. He would take me out, and we would walk out in the farm and see how everything was going along. And I really enjoyed doing that. Another time, oh, I remember he let me suit up and watch him do an appendectomy. That was memorable. Uh, um, but those are some of the things that I remember. Also, he had been a musician, as I mentioned before, and I remember playing violin with him. He taught himself piano, violin, whatever. So, yeah, those are just some of the things I remember.
So I would imagine that getting a front row seat to an appendectomy, much less working in that clinic, really had a profound impact on you. Can you tell us about you and maybe how those experiences and growing up like that sort of shaped you into the person you've become and the work you've chosen to get into?
Well, I went into healthcare, but just from a different angle. I'm not medical, I am holistic, with the aromatherapy and with the massage therapy. At one point, after my dad had died 10 years prior to my sister dying, and about 10 years prior to my sister dying in 2000. 2004. My mother died in 2005. I had come back to Tarboro to, to help out after living in Los Angeles for 30 years. And I was really devastated when it seemed like everybody died. My brother was still alive, but he wasn't local. And I had to sort of, take care of everything after their deaths. And they hadn't really cleaned up after my dad died. They hadn't gotten rid of his old clothes and stuff like that. It was too painful. And I was just like, wow, I can't go. I have to stay here because I just can't do anything else. And so I ended up opening up a holistic health clinic in my dad's old building, where I offered massage and Reiki. We had yoga. I taught Qigong and meditation, um, and had talks about nutrition and supplementation, exercise. And so I did that for about 7 years. And for sure, I was influenced by my dad and my mom with regard to that. Um, my brother went on to become a surgeon, and he worked for my dad for one of the summers while he was in med school. And for sure, he was influenced. My sister, she was not interested in medicine whatsoever. She became a librarian, excuse me, a librarian, and she was very involved in dance until she came down with just the most horrendous acute case of arthritis. And she was a poet, and I'll be getting her poetry published soon too. Um, but while she was in librarian school, she and some friends formed an organization that cataloged and indexed African American writings so that there'd be a central place for people to go to, for librarians to go to check out African American writings. That was very, very ambitious. She picked up in trying to enrich, the African American community. And while she was in Tarboro, she had to come back and live in Tarboro because the arthritis got so bad. While she was there, she became very active in the Arts Council and tried to bring arts to people who otherwise would not be exposed to the arts. So their influence ran very deep in our family for all three of us children. Um, and my dad's outreach in the community, my mom's outreach in the community were very, very important back in that time. I remember him going out in the middle of the night to treat patients, and I remember her going around Christmas time delivering these big, big bags of oranges to people who couldn't afford um, a lot of things. So, yeah, yeah. So that's how the influence went.
So clearly, your parents had a strong, long-lasting partnership. Will you tell us their story? How did they meet, fall in love, all those good things?
Well, oh gosh, I can't remember the lady's name right now, but they were introduced to each other by a woman in Tarboro. I cannot remember her name. Um, yeah, I just can't remember the lady's name. And my mom lived in DC, and she told my dad, "There's a young lady up in DC you ought to meet," and then vice versa. And then that's how they met, through this woman who was doing matchmaking. And my mother grew up in DC, a city girl. My dad was a country boy, but he 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 fell in love. They fell in love, and he proposed, and she had to move to Tarboro, which was a big change for her, a big change. So But thank God it happened.
And can you remind us how many years they were married?
Oh God, you would ask that.
I'm so sorry.
Well, let's see here now. What was it, about 1946 or so? And then he died in 1997. They became estranged at one point, but it was a strange relationship. Um, they never got a divorce. They were estranged, but he came to dinner every day at her house. So, in any big decision making, they consulted each other. So, if company came and my mother had a dinner party, I had people over for dinner, he sat at the head of the table. So, it's sort of like they couldn't live with each other any longer, but they couldn't live without each other as well. So, I mean, it was it was a partnership.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting.
Absolutely. Um, so last question for us, and then we'll dive into the chat because we've got some good questions for you in there.
Okay.
What do you feel that your father's or your parents' legacy is? What do you hope that people remember about him?
Well, one thing for sure was that he was able to make a connection with his patients. People do remember him not only for his good medical care, but for his humor, which allowed them to connect. Um, he was always, he was like I'd like to call him the people's doctor. He, some people see, an MD, especially back then, as a big status symbol, but he was very humble. He was very humble, and he really wanted to hang out with people. He he had a good time with his patients. There was always a lot of laughter down at the clinic. Even during surgeries, I remember there was singing and laughter during the surgeries. He was always willing to help, really willing to help. Whether it was like training someone, giving them support in life's tragedy, or just doing really good medical work. There was a uh, Miss Shirley Mays worked for him. He trained her to deal with, the lab work. She was his surgical nurse. She did the lab work. When the house burned down, he was right there to help out with the family and everything. People remember him for his kindness, and actually, they remember both of them for their kindness. So there was a connection. People missed him for that connection, that people connection, that heart connection that you don't always find in the medical community, in the medical system anymore. Um, I see you shaking your head, Stacy.
You sure don't. That's a rarity. I feel like what an incredible gift to have had him for a doctor and a neighbor.
Yeah, 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 and that's his legacy is, and both of theirs was the willingness to help. So, and being really smart at what they did. So, so there's there's life to be had here, and they reminded people that, you got to live your life, and hopefully you'll have some fun along the way. And the other thing is that with them talking about their lives so much is that I just want to say that people need to keep telling their stories of their ancestors. Um, it's what's going to keep us going now in this cultural time of transition and political time of transition. We got to keep our stories alive. People don't think that their stories, their personal stories are important, but they are. They absolutely are. You don't think, well, my dad wasn't a doctor, so it's not important. No, all the stories are important because there's a legacy there of survival and overcoming. So keep the stories alive. Get back to that dinner table. Get back to somewhere where you all convene and you talk and you meet. It's really important. It's really important.
It's so important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Carol, I'm going to let Allie take over and ask you the questions from the folks in the chat, and then I'll be back on.
Okay.
Hey, Carol, that was wonderful. I loved listening to that story. Just really enriching and inspiring. And I would love to get kind of more um, questions for you from the chat. So we have,
Okay.
so I'm just going to read what everybody was kind of saying during your talk and questions and finding out about your father's life. So I'm just going to see right here. So mm, So someone here is talking about if you would be able to talk about any negative encounters with the surrounding white community leaders and their attempts to prevent your father from growing his practice and provide the care for the Black community.
All right. And also tell me the names of people. I might recognize the names, I might not, if you
Um,
have the names.
yes, it's Lula Jackson.
Okay. Hey, Miss Lula. Um, Stories of impacting. Well, the biggest one is not being able to practice in Edgecombe General Hospital. I think the stories go along the line like all the stories against racism. I mean, all the stories regarding racism go where my dad was slighted. He was called, um, the nigger doctor. Um, and with that, the intonation that he must be not smart. He must be unintelligent. Um, so there are instances where um, that came out. Um, it's hard to talk about. I remember we were in the car somewhere, and we were driving on the way home from somewhere, and this is more on a personal note. Um, there's a fried chicken place. And so my dad gets out of the car to get us some fried chicken. He's told to go around to the back. And that just like killed me. That just broke my heart, to see him having to go around to the back. All these stories are real. He refused to go to the movie theaters the Colonial Theater because, it was segregated. Once it was desegregated, he went just because he could, sit wherever he wanted to in the quote unquote white section. I mean, all this is just people just don't even it's just unbelievable. The assumption that he was less than a wonderful doctor because of his race is just amazing. And also, I got to say, on the other hand, some of the African American people had a hard time getting on board with it because they've been so brainwashed that the white doctors must be better than the black doctors. So you had that coming from both sides. And it was at the dinner table that we would talk about these things. Um, so it was rough. It was very, very rough, whether it was professional, whether it was personal. Um, but then on the other hand, you had some other people, some other white people that were just like more evolved, shall we say, um, that didn't believe in the racism. Didn't
Yeah,
believe that he was subpar because of his race. Um, yeah,
yeah. Another part to that question was talking about sharing those encounters which the white community maybe helped or embraced your father. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know you kind of ended on that note about those people who would help them. Do you
yeah,
stories or
yeah. Starting with the bank in Rocky Mount that gave him the money to build, that lent him the money to build the clinic. That was huge. He couldn't find that support in Tarboro. Um, uh, Although he found other kinds of support from white people in Tarboro, with the building of the building, with the masons, with the contractors, building the building. Um, yeah, yeah. There he was encouraged by other people. There was a couple doctors who encouraged him in his work, and all of this still in the backdrop of segregation, with the segregated schools and the division of the society. There is a story that he like tells in the 50s, 1950s, early 1950s. His waiting room is usually filled with African American people. And he went out there to the waiting room and he saw this white man out there. And he said, well, what do you want? You know, like, what are you doing here? And the man said, I need help. I heard you were a good doctor. And I need to come to a good doctor. And so my dad said that he let him stay there. And so like reverse integration.
Mm.
So word did get around that my dad was brilliant. And there were a few white people that did come to him and he would treat them. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a mixed bag, but the shadow of racism always was there. But
Mm.
yes, there were a few white people that helped out. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing. Yeah. So, Lulu Jackson's also asking if you could maybe share some more stories about how your family impacted the community, maybe then and now, or like any other stories that maybe pop up of like your father's impacts to people, his patients, neighbors.
Um, well, we did a program in Tarboro recently about him. And one thing that was brought up was that he always would go and talk to the school kids um, when he was invited, to go talk to the African American school kids. It was, the schools were still segregated then, about health and health care. In fact, some of his nurses would do that too. Um, he was also on um, Tarboro Development. I can't remember the name of it, but they were always looking to, it was an organization to try to foster business and education in Tarboro for the African Americans. And that was important. Also, in terms of the church going, he made an impact by going. He belonged to St. Stephen's AME church. No, that's wrong. I got the churches all mixed up, but he belonged to an AME church that was right across the street from our house because his dad also was a preacher, AME preacher. Um, but he would go around to different country churches and just make his appearance there. It was a way of not only getting patients, but also letting people know that help was there. It was very important to let people know help is there. So, oh, and another thing is that he influenced a lot of young people to become doctors, and there are doctors who were trained down there, like my brother was. Other doctors who came and worked down there during the summers or whenever. Um, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like a very inspiring man. Um, I'm sure his impacts were amazing, and I'm very glad we're being able to talk about them. But Judy in the chat, she's kind of asking a little bit more about where we can find his collections. So do you know if anybody has any access to the collections of maybe his papers or history, maybe the archives, any museums that you know?
Yes. Well, Brody School of ugh, Brody School of Medicine has an exhibit about him. I gave them a lot of his records and artifacts after he died and after I was in Tarboro trying to straighten everything out. So Brody School of Medicine of East Carolina University in Greenville has a lot of their stuff. There are There's actually an audio archive of interviews with him at Duke. You can look that up. Um, and that's just really fascinating to listen to him talk about um, things. That's where you'll get a lot more stories and a lot more information. Duke and Brody School of Medicine. Um, the Phoenix Historical Society has, well, they're working on getting one of those metal state markers in his honor. I don't think it's finalized yet, but they're working on it. The clinic building was sold to an African American couple who are turning the building into lofts, living loft space, but they will be keeping the small exhibit that my sister started and I finished in the front of the building that was some of his artifacts. And I think I did mention that because my sister insisted that he write his story, a first book was written, and I'm having that. I've had that first edition revised so that it's easier to read, and um, I will. It'll be on Amazon, but I will have to make an announcement on Facebook or through you guys or somewhere when the second book is actually done at the end of February. It'll be called the Milton D. Quigless Story, a memoir of race, health, and medicine, something like that. But I will be making an announcement somehow, some way.
Yeah, I'm excited. I am personally interested in reading that.
It's a
So,
good one. I mean, when you think about going all the way back to the early 1900s to 1997, I mean, that's a huge span of time, and a lot happened in terms of racism and civil rights and medicine and space travel, and
yeah,
there's a lot going on in our culture.
of course, yes. So we're kind of nearing the end of our little questions right here. We have a couple more.
Okay.
Connie is asking about your father's military experience, and if you can maybe note any memories that you have of your father talking about his military experience or a story that you might have revolving around that.
No, I think you have a picture of that. You had a picture of that when he was at ROTC. That was the extent of his military um, experience. He had, um, two things that were going on. One, they needed a doctor here or there in Tarboro and the surrounding areas. I mean, huge surrounding areas. And then he had a physical disability, he had some serious foot problems. Um, but the main thing was that he was needed in the area because there was a shortage of doctors in the area. And I remember he got a letter from the president commending him on his service during the war. So that was pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So I think this is our last question that we have in the
Okay.
chat, unless any more pop up while we're speaking. But Lula wants to know if the facility is still operating to this day.
Well, as I said, it was sold to an African American couple that's turned it into um, living lofts. So it's not operating as a medical facility now. But as I said, there will be a small exhibit in the front of the building. It will be reinstated and maintained. That has, oh, it'll have some of the artifacts, his medicine bag, and all this, like so many certificates and some equipment and such. So it's an interesting exhibit. It's small, but it's very interesting. It is. Also, the Country Doctor Museum has some of his artifacts. Um, I'm not sure where the North Carolina Country Doctor Museum. It's part of the museum set up in North Carolina, but they have some of his artifacts.
Yeah. We just had one more question pop up.
Okay.
Benjamin, what happened to the home, of your home? Like, did something happen to that? Or I'm not sure if maybe this is maybe your childhood home or,
Yeah, the childhood home. Yeah, it was sold. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford to keep it up. I just couldn't afford it, and it breaks my heart to this day that I had to sell it, but I did. Um, so it's still there, but it looks, yeah, it's just not the same. It just really isn't the same. It's really too bad. Um, I have fantasies of buying it back one day when I get rich, but I don't see that happening right now. But I'm going to keep trying, Benjamin. I'm going to keep trying. So, and that was a pride and joy of my mother's, the home. Um, she won an award for that whole street of, putting up crepe myrtles and beautifying the whole, that whole street that we lived on. She was into beauty and she did an incredible job, just incredible. So,
yeah. Well,
ah, it was quite a place. Yeah, it was quite a place. It was amazing. So, but it was very expensive to keep up and I couldn't do it. It was so sad. I couldn't do it though.
Well, that was all the questions from the chat, and I thoroughly enjoyed kind of talking with you about some of the questions that our viewers had. But I'm going to turn this back over to Stacy, and she can kind of close us out and leave any lasting comments for us.
Thanks, Allie. And Carol, I
Thanks,
just
Sally.
thank you again for sharing your father and your family's incredible history and legacy with us. This has been such a special time today, getting to know more about him and you and your family. So thank you for being with us.
It has been a real pleasure, as usual, whenever I deal with the museum. It's always a great thing. You guys are the best. I really did enjoy it. And like I said, it's important to keep the stories alive and keep the history alive. And there's so much history out there that is not communicated. It's amazing. And I want to just give a shout out to the Phoenix Historical Society of Edgecombe County for doing their part, which is a big part in keeping the stories alive. They're amazing. So check them out on Facebook too. Um, yeah,
Well, and
yeah.
along those lines, we'll be looking forward to hearing about when your second edition comes out, hopefully in the next few months, so that we can all read that. That would be wonderful. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. It really is. And, I have to thank my sister, who, passed away in 2004, for urging my dad. I mean, she harped on him about, you got to tell your story, you got to get that done. And man, it's like, once he got into it, she was like, I wish I'd never said it. I wish I'd never said it because he was obsessed with it. And it was like, you couldn't get him to shut up about it. That went on for years. But we're glad that he did. And my brother always had, great faith in my dad and my mother who hung in there with him, from through thick and thin, and everything. So, yeah, yeah, I'm glad to get this out, get
We're
the
glad you're
story out.
doing it. I know it's a labor of love, but we're thankful you're doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
And thank you to all those of you who joined us today. We hope that you enjoyed today's program. And we also hope to see you at our 29th annual African American Cultural Celebration. That's this Saturday, January 25th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. This year, it's taking place over at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. So right across the plaza from the Museum of History. We'll have a few things outside, but most of it's going to be inside where it's nice and toasty.
Yeah.
So we hope that you'll join us and keep warm. um, all of you guys, in the meantime, stay safe, stay warm and dry, and we will hope to see you all very soon. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Carol. Bye.
Bye.